about. Calladito's eyes held a special light. It wasn't intelligence exactly, something more basic, something deeper. It was knowledge. His hand had been resting on the bare skin of Candy's shoulder, and he moved his fingertips to the lovely curve of her neck, where he could feel her pulse beating madly with fear as she watched the bull, too, trying to anticipate what he'd do next, and suddenly realizing that if he chose to ram into the side of their vehicle, it would be no different than being hit by a truck, but a truck armed with sharp, curved horns as thick as a man's forearm, and a will to survive.
Este es para mí, yo para él.
He whispered to her, not caring that she didn't understand much Spanish yet.
That one is for me, and I'm for him.
Where are you now, Calladito? He wondered. By law, another torero would have been responsible for killing the bull, since he could no longer do it. But this had been a one-man corrida, a special event held in his honor in his hometown of Villarica on the eve of his 30th birthday. There was no other torero. Instead, the bull would be taken to a small enclosure, where he'd be dispatched by a silver-knobbed knife with a thin blade called a verduguillo, the little executioner. He would be denied the glory of dying in the ring that he deserved, and be slaughtered anonymously without dignity, for food. He tried to turn his head to look for Calladito, but he was no longer capable of any movement other than the gagging reflex that continued as his body struggled to clear his throat and prevent him from drowning in his own blood. His hearing was still fine. He could make out the sounds of moaning and crying and shouting, and a few women shrieking. But his vision was beginning to fade. The people crowded around and above him had dulled into indistinct black shadows against the brilliant blue sky. When he had first fallen and his men had rushed to him, he had been able to make out some of their faces. One of the first to get to him had been his senior banderillero, Paco, a whip-thin, leathery man of impressive speed and indeterminate age, who rarely spoke or smiled, but whose devotion to Manuel was unquestioned. He was the only member of his cuadrilla who had been with him since the very beginning of his career. Paco had knelt over him and placed his hand on his wound, and Manuel had glanced down the length of his body and seen scarlet blood spurt between the old man's long brown fingers. He had felt the pressure, but no pain. Even when Calladito's horns had plunged beneath his ribcage, he hadn't felt pain. In his mind, he could still see Paco's lined face looming over him, twisted into a rapture of anguish so keen it could have been mistaken for joy.
Maestro.
The word came from his throat as a sob.
Manolo mio.
He had known then, for certain, what he had only previously guessed. His prestigious title and the intimate usage of his name would only be uttered together in the ring in a moment of desperation, a soldier's last chance to speak to his leader, an old man's offering of comfort to a young man he loved. Paco was saying, "My prince, my son." They were not going to be able to save him. Once he fully understood this, he almost felt like laughing. He felt the giddy relief of being let in on a particularly good secret. For most of humanity, death was a vague terror that constantly stalked them. How a man would meet his end was an overwhelming, distracting concept because there were literally thousands of ways for him to die. But for a bullfighter, there were only two ways to die: in the ring and out of the ring. Now Manuel knew